My name is Linda Carter, 62 years old, and I completely cut ties with my husband's family after they treated my grandmother's final gift like worthless trash. My Grandma Jo was the woman who saved my life when I had nowhere else to go. When my own parents threw me away like I didn't matter, she took me in and raised me with nothing but love and cornbread made from her own mill. Even at 89, living in a Georgia nursing home, she still sent me packages. Homemade cornbread, seasoned oil, and letters written with shaking hands that said, "My girl," on every page. But my mother-in-law Ruth looked at those packages like they were contaminated. Greasy junk from some old mill lady, she called them. She threw them in the trash without even opening them. "Old people don't know how to package food safely," she said. I told myself to let it go. I told myself to be grateful for the roof over my head. I told myself Ruth was just being practical. But when I finally opened that package myself, hidden inside Grandma Jo's cornbread, I found something that would destroy my husband's family forever. Because sometimes the people who throw away your love are the same ones stealing your future. If you're hearing this story, tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you listening from? Before we begin today's story, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Now let's get started. The afternoon sun blazed through the kitchen window of the small ranch house outside Tampa, Florida. Linda Carter stood at the sink, her 62-year-old hands gripping the counter edge. Her knees throbbed with each shift of weight. The Florida humidity made everything stick to everything else. On the counter beside her sat a pile of envelopes. Mortgage refinance offers, overdue utility notices, a Social Security benefits letter half pulled from its envelope. Someone else's fingerprints smudged the government seal. Linda's hands hovered over the papers. Then her mother-in-law Ruth swept past with a stack of junk mail, burying the important letters underneath pizza coupons and credit card offers. Linda's husband Rick had lost his bar and grill during the pandemic. The condo they once owned disappeared with it. Now they lived in Ruth's paid-off house with their 2 grandkids. "Until we get back on our feet," Ruth always said. The words carried weight like a mortgage payment. Ruth tapped her fingernails on the kitchen table. The sound echoed sharp in the quiet room. "Long as you're under my roof, Linda," she said without looking up, "I'll handle the important mail. Seniors get scammed every day." Linda smiled. The expression felt thin on her face. She heard the word, seniors, like a diagnosis instead of a fact. Like something that needed fixing. The cicadas whined outside. The air conditioner rattled. Somewhere in the house, a TV murmured commercials about arthritis cream and reverse mortgages. Linda wiped her hands on a dish towel. The fabric was rough against her palms. One humid morning, Linda opened the front door to let in what breeze she could find. The Florida heat hit her like opening an oven. On the porch rail sat a small brown package. The return address showed a nursing home in rural Georgia. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. Grandma Jo, the woman who raised her in a one-room house behind a grist mill. Linda's chest tightened. She could smell cornbread and coal smoke. She could hear a soft voice calling her, "My girl," across 50 years of distance. Before Linda could pick up the package, Ruth appeared behind her. She wore her floral robe and carried a broom like a weapon. "More junk from that old woman?" Ruth said. Her voice carried the edge of someone discussing vermin. Linda's fingers reached toward the package. "It's not junk," she said quietly. "It's from, I don't like food through the mail." Ruth cut her off. "Could be spoiled. Could be crawling with bugs." She nudged the box with the broom bristles. The package teetered on the rail like it might fall into the flower bed. Ruth's lips curled as if love sent in cardboard was something that should be swept away. You can't trust old people's kitchens. They forget to wash their hands. Linda's stomach dropped like a stone. The morning sun suddenly felt too bright on her skin. "Maybe I'm just being touchy," she told herself. The words felt hollow even inside her own head. She forced a little laugh. "It's not a big deal," she said out loud. Her voice sounded small in the thick air. Ruth picked up the package with 2 fingers. She carried it toward the kitchen like it was contaminated. Linda watched her walk away. Something twisted in her stomach with each step. The smell of bleach and frying oil drifted from the kitchen. The cicadas outside grew louder. Linda closed the front door. The click of the latch sounded final. That evening at dinner, the kitchen filled with the clatter of plates and voices. The kids argued over screen time. Rick stared at a job search website on his phone. His thumb scrolled endlessly. The blue light reflected off his glasses. Linda noticed Ruth slide a thick white envelope under her placemat. The motion was quick, practiced. No one else seemed to see it. Linda's fork paused halfway to her mouth. The corner of the envelope showed blue letters. Medicare summary notice. Her heart beat faster. She set down her fork. The metal clinked against the plate. "Ruth," she said casually, "do you need help reading anything?" She wiped her hands on her napkin. Reached across the table toward the envelope. Ruth's hand slapped hers away. The slap echoed in the suddenly quiet room. The kids stopped arguing. Rick looked up from his phone. Ruth smiled. The expression was tight, controlled. "No, honey," she said sweetly. "You just worry about the kids. Let the grown-ups handle the paperwork." Heat crawled up Linda's neck. The words stung like a physical blow. Let the grown-ups handle it. As if she were a child who couldn't be trusted with her own name on an envelope. Ruth stood up from the table. She tucked the envelope into a locked drawer by the refrigerator. The key made a small clicking sound as it turned. The click landed harder than any insult Linda had ever received. The house felt smaller suddenly. The Florida heat pressed down like a weight. Linda watched the locked drawer as if it might open on its own and reveal its secrets. But the metal stayed closed. The key disappeared into Ruth's pocket. Later that night, Linda lay awake listening to the air conditioner cycle on and off. Rick snored beside her. Down the hall, one of the kids coughed in their sleep. The house settled around them with small creaks and sighs. She thought about the package on the porch. About Grandma Joe's shaky handwriting. About Medicare notices hidden under placemats like dirty secrets. About being called soft, trusting, naive. A faint, nagging feeling had taken root in her chest. Something more than junk mail was being thrown away in this house. Something more than paperwork was being hidden. She could feel it in the space between her ribs, growing with each breath. The digital clock glowed red in the darkness. The numbers changed slowly. Linda watched them turn, 1 minute becoming another, while questions she didn't want to ask formed themselves in the quiet. Outside, a night bird called once. Then silence returned, the kind of silence that felt like waiting. Linda closed her eyes, but sleep stayed far away and the questions remained. They settled into her bones like humidity, persistent and impossible to ignore. Tomorrow would bring more mail, more locked drawers, more gentle smiles that didn't quite reach Ruth's eyes. Tomorrow she would have to decide whether she was imagining things or finally seeing them clearly. The air conditioner clicked on again. The fan blades whirred. And Linda Carter lay in the darkness, feeling like a stranger in a house where her name was on the mail but never in her hands. A week later, Linda sat at the same kitchen table where Ruth had hidden the Medicare notice. The morning sun cast long shadows across the scratched surface. In her hands was her bank statement. The paper felt thin between her arthritic fingers. She pressed it flat against the wood grain. Her Social Security deposit was smaller than last month. Nearly $200 smaller. Linda traced the line items with her finger. The numbers blurred as she leaned closer. Her reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck, but even with them on, the math didn't make sense. She reached for a magnifying glass from the junk drawer. The metal handle was warm from sitting near the window. Through the lens, the numbers grew larger but no clearer. $200. Gone. Like it had never existed. A fan pushed warm air over her shoulders. The blades wobbled slightly with each rotation. Somewhere in the house, a toilet flushed. Footsteps moved across the hardwood floors above her head. Ruth breezed into the kitchen with a basket of laundry balanced on her hip. She wore a house dress printed with small flowers. Her hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour. She moved like someone who had never questioned where her next meal would come from. "They adjusted your Medicare premium," Ruth said before Linda could speak. Her voice carried the tone of someone who had been expecting this conversation. "You had some tests, remember? Everything costs more now." Linda's forehead wrinkled. She couldn't remember any tests. "What tests?" she asked. Ruth set down the laundry basket. The wicker creaked under the weight of folded towels. "The ones at the clinic in Lakeland. For your arthritis. I called and took care of it when the bills came." She began folding a bath towel with sharp, efficient movements. Linda hadn't asked her to call anyone. She hadn't been to any clinic in Lakeland. The nearest clinic was 20 minutes away in the opposite direction. Her arthritis doctor was here in Tampa, at the VA Medical Center where Rick got his care. I don't remember going to Lakeland, Linda said slowly. Her hands tightened on the bank statement. The paper crinkled between her fingers. Ruth looked at her with the patient expression reserved for forgetful children. Honey, you've been having trouble with your memory lately. Don't worry. I keep track of everything for you. The words hit Linda like cold water. Trouble with her memory. As if forgetting where she put her keys was the same as forgetting entire medical appointments. As if being tired and stressed meant she couldn't trust her own mind. Ruth finished folding the towel. She moved on to a pile of washcloths. Her hands worked automatically while she talked. At our age, we have to be careful. The government people prey on seniors who can't keep up with paperwork. Linda wanted to argue. She wanted to point out that she had managed her own paperwork for 40 years. That she had balanced checkbooks and filed taxes and negotiated with insurance companies long before Ruth entered her life. But the words stuck in her throat like swallowed pride. That afternoon, while Ruth was out at church bingo, Linda finally opened one of the Medicare explanation of benefits envelopes she had rescued from the trash. The fluorescent kitchen light hummed above her head. The bulb flickered occasionally, casting unsteady shadows across the page. She spread the EOB on the table like evidence at a trial. Her name was printed clearly at the top. Her Medicare number matched the card in her wallet. But the services listed belonged to someone else's story. 3-day hospital stay, physical therapy, durable medical equipment rental, all in Polk County, 40 miles from where she lived. All for conditions she didn't have. All paid for with her Medicare benefits. Linda's breath caught in her throat. She read the page again, more slowly this time. The dates were from last month. She remembered that week clearly. She had spent it babysitting the grandkids while Rick went to job interviews that never led to offers. Maybe I forgot something, she whispered to the empty kitchen. Her voice sounded hollow in the quiet space. Maybe I am getting foggy. The refrigerator rattled. A loose part vibrated against the motor housing. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic. Like a heartbeat with an irregular rhythm. Linda pressed her palms against her temples. The pressure helped her think more clearly. She walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. Ruth's garden was perfectly maintained. Not a weed in sight. Everything in neat rows, properly labeled, completely controlled. Even the tomato plants were tied to stakes with matching pieces of cloth. Rick, she called toward the living room. Her voice carried down the hallway. Can you look at something for me? His response came back muffled by distance and distraction. What is it, babe? Linda walked toward the sound of his voice. He sat in his recliner with his phone in his hands. His thumbs moved constantly across the screen. Job search websites, she assumed. Or games. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. She held up the EOB. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze from the ceiling fan. Does this look right to you? Rick glanced at the page without really seeing it. His eyes moved back to his phone screen immediately. Your mom probably mixed something up with your grandma's papers. The government doesn't make mistakes that big. His thumbs resumed their movement. Just let her handle it. She knows what she's doing. Linda's grip tightened on the EOB. The edges cut into her palm. Sharp enough to hurt, not sharp enough to bleed. She's not my mom, Linda said quietly. Rick didn't look up. You know what I mean. But Linda wasn't sure she did know what he meant. She wasn't sure she knew anything anymore. The paper in her hands felt like proof of something. But proof of what? That she was forgetting things? That someone else was using her benefits? That she was losing her mind along with everything else? Later that evening, she walked past Ruth's bedroom on her way to the bathroom. The door was slightly open. Through the gap, Linda could see Ruth at her desk. The older woman sat with her back straight, sorting envelopes into 2 neat piles. Linda pressed herself against the hallway wall. The flowered wallpaper was textured under her shoulder blades. She held her breath and watched. Ruth's lips moved silently as she worked. She counted something under her breath. Each envelope had Linda's name on it. Some went into a folder marked household. Others went into a plastic bin beside the desk. The bin was full of shredded paper. White confetti that had once been letters and statements and notices. Ruth picked up another envelope. She held it up to the light from her desk lamp. Linda could see the government logo through the paper. Ruth's face showed no expression as she dropped the envelope into the shredder bin. It landed with a soft thud on top of the other destroyed mail. Final. Irreversible. Linda's heart pounded against her ribs. The hallway was dim and smelled of mothballs and perfume. Her knees felt weak. She steadied herself against the wall with one hand. "I'm the one who worked 40 years for those benefits," she thought. The words formed clearly in her mind, sharp with sudden understanding. "Why am I the last person to see them?" She took a deep breath. The air tasted stale in her lungs. She took one step toward Ruth's room. The floorboard creaked under her weight. "Ruth," she said softly. Her voice barely carried across the threshold. "Can we go over those Medicare papers together sometime?" Ruth didn't turn around. She continued sorting envelopes with mechanical precision. "Linda," she said without looking up, "you've always been soft. The world chews up people like you." She dropped another envelope into the shredder bin. "Let me be the tough one." The words landed like physical blows. Soft, weak, naive. The same words Linda had heard her whole life. From her parents who abandoned her. From teachers who thought she wasn't trying hard enough. From bosses who passed her over for promotions. From a husband who let his mother make decisions about his wife's life. Ruth's chair creaked as she shifted her weight. "People like you get taken advantage of," she continued. "Better to let someone with sense handle the important things." Linda stepped back into the hallway. Her bare feet moved silently on the carpet runner. The pattern was roses and vines, faded from years of foot traffic. She walked back toward her bedroom like a ghost moving through a house that had never really been her home. That night, she lay in bed listening to Rick snore. His breathing was deep and untroubled. Next to him, Linda felt like she was drowning in silence. The digital clock on the nightstand marked time in red numbers. Each minute that passed felt like another piece of her life being filed away where she couldn't reach it. Outside, a train whistle blew in the distance. Long and mournful, like a warning that came too late to matter. Linda stared at the ceiling and tried to remember when she had stopped being the protagonist in her own story. When she had become a supporting character in someone else's drama. When her name on envelopes had stopped meaning the letters were meant for her. The air conditioner cycled on. Cool air flowed over her face. But the chill she felt came from somewhere deeper than her skin. It came from the growing certainty that something was being stolen from her, one piece of mail at a time. And the most frightening part was how easy it had been. How willingly she had handed over her agency. How grateful she had felt for the prison disguised as protection. The clock numbers changed. Another minute gone. Another piece of her life passing by while someone else decided what she was allowed to know about her own existence. Ruth insisted on hosting a Sunday cookout for the extended family. To cheer everyone up, she announced over breakfast, as if good spirits could be summoned with hamburger patties and potato salad. Linda spent the morning marinating chicken while sweat trickled down her back. The Florida heat pressed against the kitchen windows like something alive trying to get in. The backyard filled with folding chairs dragged from the garage. Cousins arrived carrying covered dishes and coolers. Children ran between the adults with plastic cups of fruit punch. The charcoal grill smoked in the corner near the fence, sending the smell of lighter fluid across the yard. On the patio table sat Ruth's contributions. A plastic tub of store-bought potato salad from the grocery deli. Buns still in their plastic sleeve. A bag of tortilla chips torn open at the top. Everything practical, efficient, without personality. Next to these items sat a small dented cooler that Linda didn't recognize. The metal was scratched and worn. The handle hung at an odd angle as if it had been dropped more than once. Linda approached it slowly, her curiosity overriding her caution. Cousin Becky reached the cooler first. She lifted the lid with 2 fingers, the way someone might open a box they suspected contained something unpleasant. Her nose wrinkled immediately. "What's in here?" she asked, loud enough for several people to hear. Inside were wrapped slices of homemade cornbread. Each piece was individually covered in plastic wrap, the edges sealed with careful attention. Next to them sat a mason jar filled with dark, fragrant oil. The kind of seasoned oil that took weeks to develop its full flavor. The kind Grandma Jo used to send from her old water-powered mill in Georgia. Linda's breath caught in her throat. She felt like she was seeing her childhood kitchen through a hole in time. The smell rose from the cooler like memory made tangible. Cornmeal and cast iron, wood smoke and careful hands. Love preserved in glass and shared across distance. Before Linda could reach for the jar, Ruth appeared beside her. She moved with the swift efficiency of someone swooping down on prey. Her hand closed around the mason jar before anyone else could touch it. "Oh, that?" Ruth laughed loudly. Her voice carried across the backyard, drawing attention from conversations by the grill. "That's just some greasy junk from Linda's old mill lady down in Georgia." She held the jar up like evidence in a trial. "The nursing home keeps mailing us this stuff." Linda felt the world tilt sideways. The noise of the cookout faded to a distant hum. She threw away Grandma Joe, she thought, the words sharp as broken glass inside her skull. Around them, conversations continued. Kids shouted by the kiddie pool. A neighbor's radio played country music over the fence. But Linda heard only the sound of her own heartbeat. "I tossed the last box straight in the outside trash," Ruth continued, warming to her audience. "House already smells like poor people's food without adding this." She wrinkled her nose as if the mason jar contained something rotten instead of something made with love. Linda's vision narrowed to Ruth's hand gripping the jar. Those manicured fingers wrapped around glass that had been filled by hands that had raised her when no one else would. Hands that had ground corn and counted pennies and taught her that dignity didn't depend on the opinions of others. "Please don't talk about her like that," Linda said. Her voice trembled like a wire under tension. The words came out smaller than she had intended, but they came out. "She raised me when my parents didn't want me. If she sent this, it's because she—" Ruth cut her off with a wave of her free hand. The gesture was dismissive, final. Like swatting away an insect. "Honey, grown women don't get sentimental over old ladies and cornmeal." Her smile was sharp around the edges. "You have a new family now. Learn the difference between charity and help." She set the mason jar down on the patio table with a deliberate clink. Right next to the black plastic trash bag that held paper plates and empty beer cans. The message was clear without being spoken. Linda's knees wobbled. She reached for the back of a lawn chair to steady herself. The aluminum was hot from sitting in the sun. It burned her palm, but she held on anyway. The chair scraped against the concrete with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. The scraping was loud enough to make several relatives look over. Linda felt their eyes on her face. Saw the moment of confusion followed by uncomfortable amusement. Someone was making a scene over a jar of oil. Cousin Jimmy, Ruth's nephew, smirked from his position by the grill. "Maybe Aunt Linda shouldn't be in charge of the bills anymore if a jar of oil does her in," he said. His voice carried the casual cruelty of someone who had never been desperate. A few people chuckled. Not mean-spirited laughter, exactly. Just the uncomfortable sound people make when they don't know how else to react. Linda felt heat rise in her cheeks. The kind of burning shame that comes from being reduced to entertainment. From having your pain turned into someone else's punchline. She had spent her whole life being the soft one, the sensitive one, the one who cared too much about things that didn't matter to other people. She let go of the lawn chair and walked toward the house. Each step felt deliberate and strange, like moving through water. Behind her, conversations resumed. The grill sizzled. Someone turned up the radio. Her humiliation had already been forgotten, filed away as a minor afternoon amusement. On her way inside, Linda noticed a half-burned envelope in the trash can by the grill. The black plastic bag gaped open like a mouth. Among the beer bottles and paper napkins, she saw the corner of an envelope. The return address was partially visible. A credit union in Mill Creek, Georgia. Her full maiden name printed in careful block letters. The top edge of the envelope was singed, as if someone had started to burn it and changed their mind. Or as if someone had tried to burn it completely but been interrupted. The paper was brown around the edges but still readable. Linda's stomach twisted into a tight knot. They're not just tossing food, she thought, the understanding hitting her like cold water. They're tossing my life. She looked around the backyard. Ruth held court near the potato salad, explaining to someone why nursing home food couldn't be trusted. Rick stood by the grill, flipping burgers and nodding at whatever Jimmy was saying. The grandkids splashed in the kiddie pool, oblivious to the adult drama unfolding around them. Everyone was busy. Everyone was distracted. Linda reached into the trash bag with careful fingers. The envelope was warm from sitting in the sun. The burned edges crumbled slightly at her touch. But most of it was intact. Most of it was readable. She slipped the envelope into the pocket of her shorts. The paper crinkled softly against her leg as she walked back toward the kitchen door. Behind her, Ruth's laughter carried across the yard like the sound of something breaking. Inside the house, Linda stood at the kitchen sink and ran cold water over her wrists. The coolness helped slow her heartbeat. Through the window, she could see the cookout continuing without her. Ruth gesturing with animated hands. Rick turning meat on the grill. Family members eating food and making conversation as if nothing had happened. Because to them, nothing had happened. A silly old woman had gotten upset over a jar of oil. Ancient history from a dead mill in a forgotten town. Not worth remembering, not worth discussing, not worth caring about, but Linda cared, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel ashamed about caring. She felt angry. She picked up the mason jar from where Ruth had left it by the trash bag. The glass was cool and smooth in her hands, heavy with the weight of seasoned oil and memory. She cradled it against her chest the way she might hold something precious and fragile. "Don't drip that stuff on my floors," Ruth called from the doorway. Her voice carried warning and ownership in equal measure. Linda looked at her mother-in-law. Really looked at her. Saw the woman who had been making decisions about her life for months. Who had been deciding which mail she was allowed to see. Which phone calls she was allowed to answer. Which parts of her own past she was allowed to keep. "I won't drip it," Linda said quietly. She walked past Ruth toward her bedroom, the jar still pressed against her chest. "I'm going to keep it safe." Behind her, Ruth said something about ungrateful people and charity cases. But Linda didn't turn around. She didn't argue. She didn't apologize for caring about something Ruth couldn't understand. She just walked away, carrying Grandma Jo's gift like a torch in the darkness. Like proof that she had once been someone's "my girl." Like evidence that love could survive even when everything else was being thrown away. The hallway was cool and dim after the bright heat of the backyard. Linda's footsteps were muffled by the carpet runner. Behind her, the cookout continued. Ahead of her, her bedroom waited like a sanctuary. For the first time in months, Linda felt like she was walking towards something instead of away from it. The feeling was small and fragile, but it was hers. And that made all the difference. That night, everyone slept while Linda sat at the kitchen table in her bathrobe. A single lamp cast a circle of yellow light over the rescued package and the blackened envelope from the trash. Outside, a Florida thunderstorm rattled the windows with sheets of rain. The wind howled through the palm trees like something wild trying to break free. Inside, the only sounds were the slow ticking of the wall clock and the soft rattle of pills in her day-of-the-week organizer when her elbow bumped it. 7 compartments labeled with the days of the week. Each one filled with the same white tablets. Blood pressure medication, arthritis pills, vitamins that promised to slow the aging process but never seemed to deliver. Linda's hands shook as she peeled away the layers of tape on the package. The adhesive had yellowed with time and humidity. Some pieces came off in long strips. Others crumbled into sticky fragments that clung to her fingers. Each layer revealed more of Grandma Jo's careful wrapping, as if love could be measured in extra precaution. Inside was a Ziploc bag containing slices of cornbread. The bread was stale now, hard around the edges from its journey through the postal system. But Linda pressed a piece to her nose anyway, breathing in ghosts of cast-iron skillets and sawdust. The smell transported her instantly to the one-room house behind the grist mill, where hunger was always possible but never certain. Next to the cornbread was the mason jar of seasoned oil, its contents dark and rich with herbs and thyme. And beneath everything, wrapped in tissue paper, was a handwritten letter on nursing home stationery. The paper was thin, institutional. But the handwriting was pure Grandma Jo, shaky but determined. "My sweet Linda," the letter began. The words wavered across the page like a voice grown weak with age. "I heard from that tall boy of yours that you lost your place. I'm sorry, honey. I know how hard you worked for what you had." Linda's eyes moved down the page, following sentences that seemed to breathe with Grandma Jo's voice. "I sold off the old mill last year. Couldn't keep up with the machinery anymore, and my hands ain't steady enough for the books. But I put a little something in your name at the credit union, in case life knocked you down again." The words blurred as tears gathered in Linda's eyes. Outside, thunder rolled across the Florida sky like furniture being moved in the apartment upstairs from the world. Lightning flashed, illuminating the backyard in stark black and white. For a moment, Linda could see every raindrop frozen in the air like suspended time. "If this reaches you," the letter continued, "and if folks ain't doing right by you, go yourself and get what's yours. Don't let nobody throw you out like yesterday's trash. You got more fight in you than you know, my girl. Always did." Linda's chest tightened. "I told myself I was overreacting about the mail," she thought, the tears falling now without permission. "I told myself I was being paranoid. But you knew, didn't you, Grandma? You knew what was happening before I did." She set the letter aside carefully and reached for the burned envelope from the trash. Her fingers were steadier now, as if Grandma Jo's words had given her hands purpose. The envelope was partially destroyed, but enough remained to read the return address. A credit union in Mill Creek, Georgia. The same town where the old mill had stood. Inside was a notice printed on official letterhead. "Final reminder, unclaimed certificate of deposit account holder Linda Rose Carter." The words jumped off the page like accusations. The address on file was Ruth's house. The notice was dated 6 months ago, right before they had sold the condo. Linda's heart dropped into her stomach like a stone through water. She read the notice again, more slowly this time. The account had been opened 8 months ago. The initial deposit was substantial. More money than Linda had ever seen written on one line in her life. "They've been hiding this from me," she said out loud to the empty kitchen. Her voice sounded strange in the silence, like hearing someone else speak her thoughts. "They've been making decisions about my Social Security, my Medicare, my inheritance, like I'm already dead." The refrigerator kicked on with a mechanical hum. The sound was loud in the quiet house, startling Linda back into her body. She pressed her palm flat against the cool surface of the table to steady herself. The wood grain felt real under her skin, solid in a way that nothing else seemed to be anymore. Lightning flashed again, closer this time. The thunder followed almost immediately, shaking the windows in their frames. Somewhere in the house, something rattled against something else. A loose board. A picture frame. The sound of a structure under stress. Linda pulled open the junk drawer and began digging through the accumulated debris of daily life. Rubber bands and old keys. Expired coupons. Batteries that might or might not still work. At the bottom, underneath everything else, she found what she was looking for. A flyer from the local senior center. Bright orange paper with bold black letters, free counseling, Medicare issues, fraud, and elder financial abuse. She had shoved it in the drawer months ago, when Ruth first started helping with the paperwork. Back when she still thought she was lucky to have assistance instead of suspicious about the help. Linda's fingers traced the phone number printed at the bottom of the flyer. The numbers were real. The service was real. Help was available if she was brave enough to reach for it. If she was willing to admit that the soft, trusting woman everyone said she was had been taken advantage of by the very people who claimed to love her. But she didn't dial the number yet. Instead, she folded Grandma Jo's letter back into its tissue paper wrapping and slipped it into her wallet behind her Medicare card. The weight of paper and plastic together felt like a promise. Like ammunition for a war she hadn't known she was fighting. The wallet was old, worn soft from years of carrying the small artifacts of her life. Her driver's license with a photo that looked younger than she felt. A library card she hadn't used since they moved to Ruth's house. A picture of her grandkids from their school picture day, their smiles gap-toothed and genuine. She pressed the wallet closed and held it against her chest. Through the thin leather, she could feel the outline of Grandma Jo's letter. Physical proof that someone had loved her enough to plan for her future. Someone had seen her as worthy of inheritance rather than charity. Someone had believed she deserved to control her own life. The storm outside was beginning to move away. The thunder grew more distant. The rain against the windows softened from drumming to tapping. But inside Linda's chest, a different kind of storm was building. The kind that comes from finally seeing clearly. The kind that comes from realizing how long you've been living in the dark. She turned off the lamp and walked down the dark hallway toward her bedroom. Behind her, the kitchen returned to shadows. The package and envelope remained on the table like evidence waiting for a trial. Proof that some truths could survive being buried. Proof that love could outlast betrayal if it was strong enough to begin with. Rick was still snoring when she slipped back into bed. His breathing was deep and untroubled. The sound of someone whose conscience was clear. Or someone who had never thought to examine his conscience at all. Linda lay beside him in the darkness, listening to the storm move across the Florida sky. Some part of her old life had died tonight in the kitchen. The part that accepted other people's definitions of her worth. The part that apologized for taking up space in her own existence. But something else had been born. Something that knew the difference between being grateful and being taken advantage of. Something that understood the weight of Grandma Joe's letter in her wallet. Something that was ready to fight for what belonged to her. The digital clock glowed red in the darkness. The numbers changed slowly, marking time toward morning. Toward decisions that could no longer be postponed. Toward phone calls that needed to be made. Toward a version of Linda Carter who had forgotten how to be soft when hardness was required. She closed her eyes and felt, for the first time in months, like the protagonist in her own story again. The next morning, while Ruth and Rick were out running errands, Linda sat alone on the back porch with a cup of weak coffee and Grandma Joe's letter in her lap. The sticky Florida air pressed against her skin like a damp cloth. But in her mind, the humidity dissolved into the dry heat of a Georgia summer 45 years earlier. She was 17 again, sleeping on a cot behind Grandma Joe's water-powered grist mill. The sound of the wheel turning in the creek had been her lullaby. The smell of cornmeal dust her morning alarm. Back when she was a skinny, abandoned girl with nowhere else to go. Her birth parents had fought constantly in those days. Cards slapping against the kitchen table while a television game show blared in the background. Her father's voice rising above the noise, accusing her mother of hiding money. Her mother's voice getting smaller with each accusation, disappearing into silence and cigarette smoke. One night, Linda had watched her father tear open Grandma Joe's coffee can of emergency cash. Bills fluttered across the linoleum floor like wounded birds, green and crumpled and desperate to escape. Family money, he had sneered, stuffing them into his pocket while her mother turned away toward the sink. Linda remembered how Grandma Joe had leaned against the counter to keep from falling. How her knuckles had gone white where they gripped the formica edge. How her lips had pressed together in a line that said more than words ever could about trust broken and love betrayed. Later, in the quiet of the mill house, Grandma Joe had worked by the light of a kerosene lamp. The stone wheel groaned like an old man's knees as it ground corn into meal. Dust motes danced in the lamplight like tiny spirits celebrating their freedom from the grain. "Listen to me, girl," Grandma Joe had said, wiping flour from Linda's cheek with a calloused thumb. "Men will gamble away tomorrow for tonight's excitement. Women will look the other way rather than face hard truths. But paper don't lie." She had tapped the ledger where she recorded each transaction. "Keep your name on your money and your eyes on every bill that comes in your house." Linda pressed her thumb against the soft edge of the letter now, feeling the texture of cheap nursing home stationery. A lawnmower droned in a neighbor's yard. The smell of cut grass mixed with phantom scents of cornmeal and hot oil. Memory and reality layering themselves like geological strata in her consciousness. "I thought I escaped all that when I married Rick," she whispered to the empty porch. A lizard scurried across the wooden railing, pausing to pump its tiny chest in what looked like defiance before disappearing into the jasmine vine. But she hadn't escaped. She had walked right back into a house where somebody else decided which envelopes she was allowed to see. Where her social security check was called household money instead of her money. Where her Medicare benefits paid for someone else's medical care while she convinced herself she was being cared for. The first red flag had been the representative payee form. Linda remembered sitting at this same kitchen table while Ruth spread out mortgage refinance documents and credit card statements. The forms had looked official, important. Ruth's voice had been patient, helpful. "Let me be your representative payee," Ruth had suggested, her pen hovering over the signature line. "The government loves paperwork. Seniors get confused by all the regulations. It's better to have someone younger handle the details." Linda had signed where Ruth pointed. She had been grateful for the help. ashamed of her confusion, relieved to have someone else deal with the bureaucracy that seemed designed to frustrate people who just wanted their benefits processed correctly. That was the moment she gave away her financial independence. That was the moment she became a child in her own life, dependent on someone else's interpretation of her rights and needs. The second red flag had been subtler. Ruth started referring to Linda's Social Security deposit as house money instead of your money. A small change in language that carried enormous implications. As if Linda's 40 years of work had earned her a place in the household budget rather than ownership of her own benefits. The porch railing was rough under Linda's fingers as she gripped it tighter. Splinters bit into her palm, tiny needles of pain that felt somehow appropriate. She had been getting splinters for months without realizing it. Small wounds from trusting hands that weren't worthy of trust. A cicada started its high, electric whine in the oak tree above her head. The sound was piercing, demanding attention. Linda's heart answered with a rhythm of its own, matching the insect's urgency. Her pulse felt strong in her wrists, in her temples, in the hollow of her throat. "Grandma, I'm so sorry," she said to the morning air. Her voice was small but clear, like a prayer spoken in an empty church. "You spent your whole life making sure I'd never be at anyone's mercy again, and I let them treat me like a child anyway." She stood up slowly, her knees protesting the movement with small pops and grinding sounds. Age announcing itself in the language of joints and cartilage. But her mind felt clearer than it had in months. Sharp enough to see the pattern she had been denying. Inside the house, 3 items lay scattered across the kitchen counter where she had left them the night before. Her Medicare explanation of benefits. The unclaimed CD notice. A church bulletin from the local senior center with the words, "Know Your Rights," printed in bold letters across the front. For the first time, Linda didn't see them as random clutter. She saw them as a trail of breadcrumbs leading toward the truth. Breadcrumbs that Grandma Jo had started laying decades ago with her warnings about paper and trust and keeping your eyes on your own business. The coffee in her cup had grown cold while she sat remembering. She poured it into the potted plant beside the back door. The begonia's leaves trembled slightly as the liquid soaked into the soil. Even plants knew the difference between nourishment and waste. Linda walked back inside and gathered the 3 pieces of paper from the counter. She folded them carefully and slipped them into the manila folder she had found in the junk drawer. Her hands were steady now, purposeful. The shaking had stopped sometime during the night, replaced by something that felt like determination wearing the clothes of fury. Tomorrow, she would call the number on the senior center flyer. Tomorrow, she would ask questions that she should have asked months ago. Tomorrow, she would stop apologizing for taking up space in her own life. But today, she would sit with the weight of understanding. Today, she would honor Grandma Jo's memory by finally believing that she deserved better than this. That she deserved to be the protagonist in her own story instead of a supporting character in someone else's drama. The house was quiet around her, holding its breath while she made her decision. Outside, the lawnmower continued its systematic path across the neighbor's grass. The cicada fell silent, and Linda Carter stood in her kitchen, holding a folder full of evidence, feeling like herself again for the first time in longer than she cared to remember. On Monday morning, Linda took the city bus to the Tampa Senior Resource Center. The building was low and beige, tucked between a nail salon and a tax preparation office. The waiting room smelled like coffee and copier toner. A television mounted on the wall played a commercial about protecting yourself from Medicare scams. The irony was not lost on her. She clutched her manila folder against her chest like armor. Inside were the Medicare summaries, Social Security letters, and the burned credit union notice. Physical proof of what she now understood was not confusion or forgetfulness, but theft disguised as care. The intake coordinator was a woman named Monica, about Linda's daughter's age if Linda had ever had a daughter. She wore sensible shoes and a patient expression that suggested she had heard every story twice and still cared about the endings. Monica led her to a small office lined with brochures about nutrition programs and housing assistance. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in the flat, honest light of institutional spaces. No shadows to hide in here. No soft edges to blur the truth. Linda spread her documents across the desk like a hand of cards she was finally ready to play. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice, to her own surprise, did not waver. "I think my mother-in-law has been stealing from me," she said. The words felt strange in her mouth, like speaking a foreign language she had just learned. But they also felt true in a way that nothing had felt true for months. Monica nodded and pulled her keyboard closer. Her fingers moved efficiently across the keys, calling up screens of information that Linda had never known existed. Government databases, Medicare claims histories, Social Security payment records, a digital paper trail that told the story of Linda's financial life in stark, undeniable detail. "According to Social Security," Monica said, turning the monitor so Linda could see, "your representative payee is Ruth Ellen Carter. That means your monthly checks have been going into an account she controls." She pointed to a line of code on the screen. "See this? This gives her legal authority over your benefits." Linda stared at her own name linked to Ruth's by government machinery she had never understood. "They put my life in someone else's hands," she thought, a wave of shame and fury rising in her chest. "And they never told me what that meant." The air conditioner hummed overhead, blowing too cold air on her damp palms. "So when my benefit seemed to go down last month," Linda started to ask. "Your benefit didn't go down," Monica interrupted gently. "Your Medicare Part B premium went up because there's additional activity on your file." She clicked to another screen, highlighting entries in yellow. "There are claims under your number for services in Polk County. Outpatient visits, physical therapy, durable medical equipment rental." Linda leaned closer to the screen. The dates were from the past 6 months. Services she had never received in places she had never been. "Those aren't mine," she said. "No," Monica agreed. "According to the provider billing, these services were received by Ruth Ellen Carter. But they were billed to your Medicare account." She turned to face Linda fully. "Mrs. Carter, this isn't a mistake. This is fraud." The word hung in the air between them like smoke. Fraud. Not family drama. Not generational misunderstanding. Not the natural result of aging and confusion. Crime. Federal crime committed by someone who claimed to love her. "I told myself I was just getting forgetful," Linda said, the admission scraping her throat raw. "I told myself I should be grateful for help." Outside the window, palm trees swayed in the Florida heat. The world continued its normal rotation while her understanding of everything shifted. "What do I do?" she asked. Her voice cracked on the last word, 40 years of deference breaking apart like old paper. Monica's response was calm and methodical. "We file reports with Social Security and Medicare fraud units today. We request that the representative payee be changed back to you. And we contact this credit union in Georgia about the unclaimed certificate of deposit." She looked at Linda carefully. "Do you have any reason to believe your mother-in-law would destroy mail about your accounts?" Linda thought of the shredder bin beside Ruth's desk. Of the burned envelope in the trash. Of packages from Grandma Jo dismissed as greasy junk and thrown away like contamination. "Yes," she said, her fingers curling into fists around the folder edges. "Yes, I do. And I'm tired of pretending I don't see it happening." Monica pulled forms from a file drawer. Official documents with government seals and boxes for signatures. "This is going to change your living situation," she warned. "Once we file these reports, your mother-in-law will know that you know. She may ask you to leave her house." Linda considered this possibility. Being homeless at 62. Starting over with nothing but Social Security benefits and whatever inheritance Grandma Jo had managed to preserve. The prospect should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like possibility. "I've been homeless before," she said. "When I was 17 and had nowhere to go. Grandma Jo took me in then. Maybe she's taking me in again now, just from further away." By the end of the afternoon, Linda had signed forms requesting a payee review. She had faxed copies of Grandma Jo's letter and the CD notice to the credit union in Mill Creek. She had scheduled a video call with an elder law attorney through the legal aid program. Most importantly, she had stopped calling what was happening to her by soft names that obscured the truth. It wasn't family dynamics or generational differences or the natural challenges of aging. It was theft. It was abuse. It was a crime being committed by people who counted on her shame and silence to protect them from consequences. As Linda left the building, Monica pressed a brochure into her hand. Elder financial abuse. It's not family drama, it's a crime. The cover showed an older woman signing papers while younger hands guided her pen. The image made Linda's stomach twist with recognition. Walking back to the bus stop, the humidity wrapped around her like a wet blanket. But her shoulders felt lighter than they had in months. She slid Grandma Joe's letter and her Medicare card back into her wallet, and for the first time since moving to Ruth's house, she didn't feel like she was carrying dead weight. She was carrying evidence. She was carrying proof. She was carrying ammunition for a war she was finally ready to fight. The bus ride home gave her time to think about what would happen next. Ruth and Rick would deny everything. They would call her ungrateful, paranoid, confused. They would say they were trying to help. They would make her feel guilty for questioning their motives. But Linda was done feeling guilty for protecting herself. Done apologizing for wanting control over her own life. Done being soft when hardness was what the situation required. The bus wheezed to a stop outside Ruth's neighborhood. Linda climbed down onto the sidewalk, her folder tucked securely under her arm. The afternoon sun beat down on the pavement like a hammer. But for the first time in months, the heat didn't feel oppressive. It felt like energy, like fuel for the fire that had started burning in her chest. Like the beginning of something rather than the end. She walked toward the house where she had been living as a guest in her own life, ready to start living as the owner of her own story instead. 2 weeks later, Linda sat in a conference room at the county legal aid office. The space was deliberately neutral, designed to contain difficult conversations without inflaming them. Beige walls, generic landscape prints, a polished table that reflected the fluorescent lights like still water. Across from her sat Rick and Ruth, both wearing the careful expressions of people who had been caught but hadn't confessed yet. Ruth's purse sat in her lap like a shield. Rick's hands were folded on the table, his wedding ring catching the light each time he shifted his weight. Beside Linda sat attorney David Nguyen, a calm man in his 40s who spoke as if words were currency to be spent carefully. His folders were color-coded and meticulously organized. Green for Social Security documents. Blue for Medicare fraud reports. Yellow for the credit union correspondence. Through the window, the courthouse clock tower loomed against the afternoon sky like a silent witness. Linda could hear traffic moving past on the street below, people going about their ordinary lives. While her extraordinary reckoning unfolded in measured legal language, David opened the green folder first. The Social Security Administration has completed their investigation, he said, his voice carrying no emotion beyond professional competence. Mrs. Carter, you were designated as Linda's representative payee without her full understanding of what that meant or what alternatives were available. He placed copies of documents on the table where everyone could see them. Forms with Ruth's signature. Applications that had been processed without Linda's direct involvement. A paper trail that told the story of financial control transferred quietly and efficiently. You used this authority to redirect Linda's benefits to accounts she couldn't access, David continued. You also used her Medicare number to obtain medical services for yourself. These actions constitute fraud against both Social Security and Medicare. Ruth's face had drained of color as he spoke, but her chin remained elevated. I was protecting her, she said, the words coming out sharp and defensive. She's always been soft, easy to take advantage of. I kept a roof over her head when she had nowhere else to go. Linda listened to the familiar words. Soft, helpless, grateful. The same descriptions that had followed her through life like a diagnosis she couldn't shake. But they sounded different now, filtered through the calm authority of legal proceedings. They sounded like excuses rather than explanations. Protection doesn't involve hiding mail or using someone else's Medicare benefits, David replied. He opened the blue folder and removed the credit union correspondence. This certificate of deposit represents a substantial inheritance that Mrs. Carter attempted to keep from Linda's knowledge. The amount was printed clearly on the bank statement. More money than Linda had ever seen accumulated in one place. Money that represented the sale of Grandma Joe's mill, her life's work converted into a nest egg for the girl she had raised when no one else would. That money would have gone to bills anyway, Ruth said, her voice rising slightly. She doesn't understand financial planning. I was going to use it to pay off the house, maybe set aside something for the grandkids' education. It wasn't your money to plan with, David said simply. And it wasn't your decision to make. Linda felt something shift inside her chest as she listened to this exchange. For months, she had accepted Ruth's version of events. Had internalized the idea that she was too soft, too trusting, too confused to manage her own affairs. But sitting in this room, hearing her situation described in legal terms, she understood that her softness had never been the problem. The problem was people who mistook kindness for weakness and used that mistake to justify taking things that didn't belong to them. I told myself I was lucky to have any roof at all, Linda said, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. Her voice was quiet but steady. But stealing my social security and my inheritance isn't protection. It's abuse. The words felt foreign in her mouth. Abuse. She had always associated that word with dramatic situations involving police and hospitals. But this was abuse too. Quieter, more polite, dressed up in concern and family obligation. But theft nonetheless. David slid a proposed settlement agreement across the table. The pages were dense with legal language, but the essential points were clear. Social Security had already removed Ruth as Linda's representative payee. Medicare was conducting an investigation into the fraudulent claims. The credit union would release the inheritance directly to Linda. You have two choices, David told Ruth and Rick. Cooperate with this agreement, which acknowledges that you will not access Linda's benefits or inheritance funds again. Or we proceed with criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. Rick looked at Linda for the first time since they had entered the room. His eyes were red-rimmed, either from stress or sleepless nights. You're really going to do this to your family? He asked. The question hit Linda like a physical blow. Family. The word that had been used to justify so much. The reason she should be grateful instead of angry. The excuse for decisions made without her input. The weapon wielded to make her feel guilty for protecting herself. But as she looked at Rick across the table, she noticed things she had been ignoring for months. His hands were clean, soft. No calluses from job searches that led to actual employment. His wallet, visible when he reached for his phone, contained at least 3 Players Club cards from local casinos. No, Linda answered, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. I'm finally doing something for my family. For me, and for Grandma Jo, and for every woman who worked 40 years just to have someone else decide what her money should pay for. Ruth's composure cracked slightly. After everything I've done for you, she said, her voice thin with indignation. I opened my home. I managed your paperwork. I saved you from making mistakes. You saved me from living my own life, Linda replied. There's a difference. David placed a pen beside the settlement agreement. The legal issues are straightforward, he said. The personal issues are yours to resolve. But the money stops flowing through other people's hands as of today. Ruth signed the agreement with sharp, angry strokes. Rick's signature was smaller, defeated. Linda signed last, her hand steady. As she wrote her name, she felt like she was signing something larger than a legal document. She was signing herself back into ownership of her own existence. Afterward, as they gathered their belongings to leave, Rick stopped beside Linda's chair. I hope you know what you're doing, he said quietly. I hope you can live with breaking up the family. Linda looked up at him. This man she had married, who had stood by while his mother dismantled her financial independence piece by piece. Who had dismissed her concerns and encouraged her dependence. Who had never once asked if she wanted help before accepting it on her behalf. The family was already broken, she said. I'm just the one who finally said it out loud. As they left the building, Linda felt the Florida heat press against her skin like a promise. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She would need to find a place to live. She would need to rebuild a life from components that had been scattered by months of financial abuse. But she would do it as herself. With her own name on her accounts and her own hands on her mail. With Grandma Jo's inheritance as a foundation and her own determination as the structure built on top of it. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Linda Carter was the protagonist in her own story. And she intended to make it a good one. 4 months later, Linda unlocked the door to her small apartment at Sunshine Gardens Senior Community on the edge of Tampa. The key felt substantial in her hand, brass and purpose made manifest. Sunlight reflected off the community garden outside her window, where residents tended tomatoes and herbs in raised beds built at wheelchair height. The hallway smelled like coffee and laundry detergent instead of cigarettes and resentment. Her neighbors' voices carried through thin walls, but they were voices of people choosing their own conversations rather than enduring them. Mrs. Patterson from next door hummed old show tunes while she watered her plants. Mr. Rodriguez played dominoes with his grandson every Sunday afternoon, their laughter punctuating the peaceful routine. On Linda's kitchen wall hung a framed black and white photograph of Grandma Jo standing in front of the old mill. Flour dusted her apron like powdered snow. Her eyes looked directly at the camera with an expression that balanced kindness and steel in equal measure. The frame was simple, drugstore quality. But the image it contained was priceless. Linda's Social Security check now landed directly into an account she had opened herself at the credit union downtown. The banker, a young woman with kind eyes and infinite patience, had walked her through every form and signature. Had explained each service fee and account feature. Had treated Linda like someone capable of making her own financial decisions rather than someone who needed protection from them. The certificate of deposit from Grandma Jo's mill sale sat safely in a separate account, partially used to pay off debts and secure this apartment. The rest she had earmarked for two specific purposes: educational funds for her grandkids and a small scholarship at the local community college for kids who had aged out of foster care. The Joanna Rose Scholarship, she had named it. Money that would help young people who, like her, had learned early that family was something you built rather than something you inherited. On Tuesday mornings, Linda volunteered at the senior center where Monica had first helped her understand what was happening to her benefits. She sat with other older adults, helping them read Medicare summaries and bank statements. Teaching them to spot unauthorized charges and fraudulent claims. Showing them where to find the phone numbers that led to help rather than confusion. Every time someone said, "I thought it was just me being confused," Linda recognized the tremor in their voice. The shame that came from questioning your own memory. The guilt that accompanied protecting yourself from people who claimed to love you. "It's not confusion," she would tell them, her voice gentle but firm. "Confusion is when you can't remember where you put your keys. This is when someone else takes your keys and convinces you that you lost them." The distinction mattered. Understanding the difference between natural aging and deliberate exploitation was the first step toward reclaiming agency in your own life. Linda kept in touch with Rick only through lawyers now. He had signed the agreement to avoid criminal charges and moved in with a cousin across town. The divorce papers were filed but not yet final. The process was slow, complicated by years of entangled finances and the legal requirement to untangle joint accounts that had never been truly joint. Ruth complained to anyone who would listen at church. She told her version of the story to neighbors and relatives, painting herself as the victim of an ungrateful daughter-in-law who had bitten the hand that fed her. Linda heard the gossip secondhand, filtered through community networks that carried information like water through limestone. But Linda had blocked Ruth's phone number and changed her mailing address. The opinions of people who enabled financial abuse because it was easier than confronting it no longer held power over her choices. She had learned the difference between being talked about and being understood. The grandkids visited Linda's apartment most weekends. Their laughter filled the two small rooms in ways that money never could have. They helped her plant herbs in containers on her tiny balcony. They learned to make cornbread using Grandma Jo's recipe, their small hands measuring cornmeal. While Linda told them stories about the mill and the woman who had saved her twice. One Saturday evening, while 9-year-old Emma helped roll out biscuit dough, she asked the question Linda had been expecting. "Grandma, why don't you live with Daddy and Grandma Ruth anymore?" Linda paused, her hands still in the bowl of flour. How do you explain financial abuse to a child? How do you describe the slow erosion of autonomy without creating fear or cynicism about trust itself? Sometimes, Linda said carefully, people think they know what's best for you better than you know yourself. And sometimes they're wrong. She helped Emma fold the dough, their fingers working together. I needed to live somewhere where I could make my own decisions about my life. Emma considered this with the seriousness children brought to adult explanations. But you still love us, right? More than all the stars in the sky, Linda said, the old phrase coming automatically. Living somewhere different doesn't change how much I love you. It just changes where I keep my toothbrush. This answer satisfied Emma, who returned her attention to the biscuits with the resilience of childhood. But Linda felt the weight of the conversation settling in her chest. The knowledge that her choices had consequences beyond her own life. That protecting herself had required disrupting the lives of people she loved. Later that evening, after Emma and her brother had gone home with promises to return next weekend, Linda sat at her small kitchen table with a checkbook and a stack of bills. Not bills she couldn't pay, but bills she was choosing how to pay. Utilities and groceries and a small monthly donation to the scholarship fund she had established in Grandma Jo's name. As she signed each check, she noticed the steadiness of her own hand. The confidence in the formation of each letter. For 62 years, seeing her name in ink had made her feel like she owed the world an apology for existing. Like her signature was permission she had to ask for rather than authority she inherently possessed. Now, writing her name felt like claiming space she had always been entitled to occupy. Like announcing her presence in her own life rather than apologizing for the inconvenience of being herself. The apartment was quiet around her, but it was a different quality of silence than she had known at Ruth's house. This was the silence of choice rather than suppression. The silence of being alone with yourself instead of being lonely in a crowd. Outside her window, the community garden glowed under the security lights. Tomorrow, she would tend her plot of tomatoes and peppers. She would attend her Tuesday morning volunteer shift at the senior center. She would have lunch with Mrs. Patterson and help Mr. Rodriguez teach his grandson to play chess. These were small activities, ordinary moments that made up the substance of a life. But they were her activities, chosen by her, scheduled according to her preferences rather than someone else's convenience. She thought about Grandma Jo, who had worked her entire life to give a throwaway girl something solid to stand on. Who had saved money in coffee cans and hidden it from people who would have spent it on temporary pleasures. Who had sold her life's work to make sure Linda would never be completely without resources, even when everything else fell apart. "Thank you," Linda said to the photograph on her kitchen wall. "Thank you for believing I was worth saving. Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't require permission to exist." The words felt like prayer and promise combined. A recognition of debt and a commitment to honor it. Not by living small and grateful, but by living fully and freely. By using the inheritance not just for survival, but for the kind of generosity that created more inheritance for the next person who needed saving. Life doesn't end just because it breaks once. What falls apart can be the very place where we learn to stand again. If this story gave even a small moment of strength to someone out there, then everything Linda went through means something today. Sometimes the people who claim to protect us are the ones we most need protection from. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop being kind to people who mistake your gentleness for permission to take advantage. Linda Carter learned this truth at 62, which some might consider too late. But she knew better. She had learned it exactly when she needed to learn it, exactly when she was ready to act on it, exactly when her grandmother's love reached across time and distance to remind her that she had always been worth fighting for. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe, and share a piece of your own story in the comments below. Your words might become the seed of the next chapter we create together. Thank you for spending this time.